Imagine the cobble streets slick with rain and mud, the flickering light of oil lamps reflecting in the puddles, and the stench of stale waste and chamber pots heavy in the air. Into this grime and squalor steps Els von Aestit, a medieval prostitute trying to eke out a living in one of Europe's great cities. Her face, however, is unfamiliar to the general public. She is not known as Elsa the sex worker, but rather Els, the daughter of Hans and Gertrude. Nobody knows she has sold her body for money. That's how it is when you are a medieval prostitute. Your name, your past, and your identity are all erased. You become synonymous with your profession and nothing else matters. In today's episode, we will explore the horrific life of a medieval prostitute. A job that was brutal, bloody, and all too often deadly. So grab your helmet and shield, fellow viewer, and prepare to enter the dark underbelly of medieval Europe. The life of a medieval prostitute was far from the romanticized image of a noble sex worker portrayed in popular culture. Instead, it was a harsh and unforgiving reality of violence, destitution, and disease. Prostitution was widespread during the Middle Ages, and these women were firmly entrenched in society, yet they were treated as outcasts. In fact, they were considered to be dishonorable. This term might seem like a contradiction, considering that prostitution was widely accepted, but being branded as dishonorable came with its own set of consequences. It meant that prostitutes were not afforded the same legal rights as other citizens. They could not get married, join guilds, or hold public office. They were effectively trapped in a cycle of poverty with limited opportunities for advancement. What made it worse was that their work was usually managed by a brothel owner or stewholder, who took a substantial portion of their earnings. This left the prostitutes with very little to survive on, forcing them to work long and irregular hours to make ends meet. But it wasn't just financial hardship that they faced. Violence was also a constant threat in their daily lives. If a client or pimp mistreated them, they had no legal recourse to seek justice, and the authorities rarely intervened in such cases. As a result, assaults and even murders of prostitutes were not uncommon, and the perpetrators often went unpunished. The working conditions were also appalling. Brothels were filthy and overcrowded, and the staff rarely cleaned the premises. This created a breeding ground for disease, and sexually transmitted infections, or STIs, were rampant among prostitutes. One of the most common STIs was syphilis, which could lead to blindness, paralysis, and death. There was no cure for these diseases, and a prostitute's body became a battleground as she fought to stay alive. The endless cycle of infection and recovery left their bodies physically exhausted and scarred. To add to their misery, the church viewed prostitution as a necessary evil, a lesser sin that protected respectable women from lustful men. However, this justification did not stop the church from condemning the women themselves. Despite being considered necessary, they were still shamed and stigmatized. Cities like Nuremberg, where Els von Aestit likely lived, had strict laws regulating brothels. These regulations aimed to control the women and prevent the spread of disease, but they did little to protect the prostitutes from abuse. In fact, the laws often gave authorities the power to exploit and punish them. And when it came to their children, The stigma followed them to the next generation. The offspring of prostitutes were considered illegitimate and dishonorable from birth, denying them any chance of social mobility. No matter what they did, they would always be looked down upon, and it would be difficult for them to escape the shadow of their mother's profession. Moreover, the low pay and high demand meant that women were forced to work grueling hours to survive. Often they were forced to turn tricks as young as 10 years old and had to serve up to 20 men a day. It was a relentless and exhausting cycle that took a heavy toll on their bodies and minds. Many women were driven to prostitution by dire circumstances such as famine, war, or poverty, with little access to education or job opportunities. Prostitution seemed like the only way to put money in their pockets and feed themselves and their families. But this desperate act came at a steep cost, trapping them in a life of shame and exploitation. It wasn't uncommon for women to take loans or make deals with brothel owners to secure their release from the horrors of the battlefield, only to find themselves shackled by debt and forced to continue working as prostitutes. The economic realities of the time meant that many women were perpetually in debt to their brothel owners, a form of economic servitude that made it nearly impossible to escape. Medieval prostitutes were seen as a commodity, and her body was treated like public property. She had no say in who she slept with, when she worked, or how many clients she serviced. Her every move was dictated by pimps or brothel owners who saw her as a source of income and nothing more. They were forced to dress in revealing and provocative clothing, and men often ogled and harassed them on the street. In many towns, prostitutes were forced to register with the local church or town hall and display a special badge or symbol, such as a yellow scarf or a specific bell, to identify themselves as outcasts. This public shaming was a constant reminder of their dishonorable status, and served as a warning to other women not to follow in their footsteps. Life expectancy for a medieval prostitute was a mere 25 years, a stark contrast to the average lifespan of 35 years for women in general. The combination of disease, violence, and squalid living conditions claimed many lives, turning the profession into a death sentence for many. Despite the horrors they faced, some prostitutes managed to use their position to gain power and influence, particularly those who worked for wealthy clients or had connections to organized crime. They could leverage their intimate knowledge of the city's underbelly to gather intelligence or blackmail powerful figures. However, these instances were rare exceptions rather than the norm. Els von Eystad's story is a compelling example of a woman whose life was deeply affected by the societal norms and expectations of her time. Although historical records offer little insight into the interior lives or feelings of medieval prostitutes like Els, her story provides a valuable lesson about the importance of recognizing the struggles of marginalized groups throughout history. Her life was a testament to the resilience of women who, despite facing unimaginable challenges, still managed to persevere and make their voices heard. By shedding light on the experiences of women like Els, we can better understand the complex realities of medieval life and appreciate the progress that has been made toward gender equality and social justice. Today, We remember Els and all the countless other prostitutes who lived during the Middle Ages. Their stories may have been hidden in plain sight, but their legacy continues to remind us of the need for compassion, understanding, and change in our world today. So what do you think? What was life like for a medieval prostitute? How did it compare to other jobs of the time? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed today's video. Be sure to check back for new episodes every week. And if you'd like to support the channel, consider becoming a member. Thanks again, and I'll see you next time.